Because, for example, in research on leaders, we found that some leaders can be very good at any two or one of them and bad at any of the others. Right? In other words, every combination is possible. You can be really emotionally intelligent, manage yourself well, manage other people well, but be absolutely blind to systems and to the larger context in which your organization is operating. Or you can be very good at managing yourself and very bad at reading people. There are actually a lot of, in the workplace, there is a whole class of people who are outstanding individual contributors, often very good at systems, and work very hard. Computer programmers, for example, who have zero empathy. I was talking to someone here in Europe who was with a company, and he said, we have a guy who is absolutely brilliant at systems, and we can't put him in front of a client. Because when we do, he just starts talking nonstop. He never stops to, meet the client, to find out what's on their mind, to understand the problem from their point of view. So here's someone who's very good at at managing himself, and at systems, but not people. Is attention handled differently within different, or valued differently?
Yeah, I think that
absolutely.
Societies like Bhutan, for example.
Sure. Oh yeah, culture makes an enormous difference, particularly, for example, in valuing attention training. Most of the attention training methods we use now come from Eastern cultures. Because Eastern cultures, like Bhutan, for example, many people in Bhutan are meditators. Maybe, to some extent, almost all of them, all of the citizens. It's part of the culture. It's part of the background. And so the methodologies they have are quite sophisticated. They've been developed over millennia. And people like Richard Davidson, who I mentioned, who do research in this area, are using expert advisors from those cultures to help him understand what the potential is for us to train attention. Because in the West, we're rather stunted in our view of how to train attention. So I think when it comes to a mental faculty, culture makes an enormous difference. The same thing is true, by the way, of emotions. Every culture values and expresses emotions differently. Everyone universally has the same wiring for emotion.
Our emotions are contagious.
Yes.
Therefore, should we spend more or less time with our angry colleagues? Should we be the American bus driver or the French monk? Should we save the world or save ourselves?
Well, the French monk is actually good at saving everyone. That's his mission. But apart from that, I think that it's important to understand the dynamic of sending and receiving emotions. So there's several factors that determine in any given interaction who sends and who receives. There are studies done, for example, where two strangers come into a lab, they fill out a questionnaire, mood questionnaire, how do you feel right now? Then they sit facing each other in silence for 2 minutes. Then they fill out the same questionnaire. Turns out the person in that dyad who's most emotionally expressive transmits his or her emotional state to the other person in 2 silent minutes. So expressivity is very important. On the other hand, power matters. In any human group, it's natural to pay most attention to and put most importance on what the most powerful person in that group says and does. So emotions tend to spread from the person who has power outward. What this means, for example, and these are experiments done on teams, if the leader of a team is in a very bad mood, people on the team catch the mood and performance goes down. If the leader of the team is in a very good mood, a positive mood, people catch that and performance goes up. And this is true for business decisions, for creativity, for physical coordination, like putting up a tent. So that's a second factor, is the power relationship. The third factor has to do with Mathieu Ricard, and that is, how stable are you? If you are going to go and be with your angry colleague, are you stable enough in a positive state that, like him, you can bring, or the bus driver, you can bring him into that state? Or are you going to end up angry yourself? So those are at least 3 factors that might determine the answer.
Fascinated by the advocacy of social emotional learning.
Yes.
And it would appear that there are many Western parents today who have glommed onto the same focus in prescribing Ritalin for many of their kids. Can you take a minute and talk a little bit about, you've described an organic approach to improving focus, and I look forward to reading more about those. But what are the impacts of the overprescription of Ritalin? What are the effectiveness, long-term effects?
Right. So Ritalin, which of course is given to children who have so-called ADHD, attentional deficit hyperactivity disorder. 50 years ago, they used to say, well, he's just a little boy, he'll outgrow it. But now it's become a diagnostic category, and there's some kids who have genuine problems paying attention. They're not being helped by digital media as they are today. They would be very helped by these lessons in cognitive control, which are very new and are just now being studied. So there are people like Davidson are studying the ways in which we can use attentional training. Think about it. Why has this culture had as its default buying a drug and giving it to our children for something which is a skill deficit? It's a skill deficit. Attention is a skill. I think the reason is there are drug companies who are making a lot of money selling us those drugs and convincing us that this is the better alternative. This is my personal opinion. When in fact, what we have not done is basic research on the attentional mechanisms involved in ADHD and what kind of training would help children get better at it. And I think within the next 5 years, we're going to see a set of very direct interventions that are non-pharmaceutical in those conditions.
I just wanted to ask your opinion as to what extent do you think our emotional reactions are learned or innate?
Well, our emotions are innate, I think, and our particular emotional reactions are largely learned. I have to recommend my wife's book here. It's called Mind Whispering. Her name's Tara Bennett Goleman. She's a psychotherapist. Because she talks about the way in which emotional patterns of reactivity are learned in childhood and how you can use mindfulness, cognitive therapy, a number of interventions to change the habits that are self-defeating. Actually, there's data on that. If you're a pessimist, can you learn to be an optimist? And there's research done by a fellow named Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania, who developed a field called positive psychology. He developed the field because psychology for 80 years only studied pathology. So there was a problem. We hadn't noticed that there was a positive spectrum of emotion and experience. But at any rate, Seligman took kids who were prone to depression. It turned out that they tended to be pessimists and to see if they had something that didn't work out or a setback in life, they'd say, it's because of me and I'll always be like that. And he taught them to think differently. Well, it was the circumstances can change, and I can do something to change them. It's a more optimistic outlook. And he found that actually after about a year, their thinking patterns had changed. But it's what I said, as with any such behavior, we have to keep at it, and keep at it at every naturally occurring opportunity, and catch ourselves when we go back to the old pattern. So yes, optimism can be learned. I actually know the gentleman who invented cognitive therapy. Cognitive therapy looks at our distorted thinking patterns and helps us see more realistically, and it's very effective for depression. His name is Aaron Beck. He's 93 now. He had a terrible accident that put him in a wheelchair, and I happened to speak to him after that, and he was very upbeat. He's one of the most optimistic people I know. Then he lost sight in one eye, and I was talking to him. He said, well, my right eye works perfectly fine. I can still read. And then he went blind in his right eye, and he said, I can still listen to books on tape. In other words, he had the capacity to see what was right instead of what's wrong, which is what you're talking about. Yes?
Hi. I just had a question about the performance graph that you have there.
Yes.
You mentioned two extremes. You have the unmotivated,
Yes.
low performance end, and then you have the frazzle end.
Yes.
What can you do if you're one of those types of people?
What can
how
we do?
How can you improve your
What we can
performance?
do with this type of person and with this type of person.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you in this hypothetical question, are we this type of person, or are we managing this type of person? Or a friend of this? Who are we? Are we the person?
A friend of this type of person.
We're a
like
friend
an
of this type.
undermotivated.
Okay. I have a friend who, yeah.
Let's say the
We psychologists hear
undermotivated,
that all the time.
disengaged person.
So, what the person needs who is under-aroused, who's disengaged, is involvement to get more motivated, more passionate, more engaged. And there's a literature now on something called good work. Good work combines three things. It combines what we're really good at, our excellence, with what we're really passionate about, what engages us, and what we value with our ethics. If you align those three things, you're naturally going to go up from here to there. In fact, you'll get into flow much more easily. So one question to ask our friend is, what would be good work for you, and what could you do to make it a larger proportion of the time in your day or your week or your month, or over the course of the next 5 years of your career? So that's a kind of individual strategy for that. If you're here, if you're in frazzle, what you need is calm. So, which is very related to cognitive control, but there are many ways to calm down. However, if you can't, well, there are two strategies. If you're, say, frazzled because you have a boss that asks you to do too much in too little time and give too little support, you might get your boss's CV and send it out to a headhunter. But that's not an immediate solution. So instead, you might manage your own world better by finding something that works for you, that gets you physiologically relaxed. It might be meditation, it might be yoga, it might be deep muscle, it might be working out at the gym. Everyone is different. Do it every day. And do it before you go to work, or whatever's frazzling you. Because what happens is that over time, your body's set point for stress changes, and you'll be able to manage better or to be in a more relaxed state in the circumstance. Two general strategies. Yes?
I've got two quick questions. The first one might be a silly question, so I apologize if I've missed this, but do you see focus as an extension of emotional intelligence, or is it cognitive, or is it both?
Right. So what I think is that attention was embedded within emotional intelligence because the brain's circuits for emotions, for empathy, and for attention intermingle. I just never thought about it. In that each of us is born with a particular range of set points in the brain chemicals that manage emotion. That's our temperament. And as you know, if you have more than one child, kids differ from day one. On the other hand, epigenetics tells us that it's not the genes you have, it's which genes turn on and off that will make the lasting difference. And the behavior in a child is very malleable. So if a child is very impulsive, that child can learn cognitive control. If a child is too constricted, that child could learn to loosen up. There's data on children, for example, who are what are called behaviorally inhibited. This is work of Jerome Kagan at Harvard. He finds that about 15% of children are anxious about new stimuli, new playground, new friend, new food, when they're very young. These are the kids who at school age are identified as shy. And it had been thought that this was just genetic. But what he realized when he followed a group of these kids was that some of them by school age weren't shy. And he looked at the parenting they got, and he found that the difference was this. If your parents identify you as she's shy, and protect you, those are the children who don't change. If parents say to a child, well, you may feel a little timid about it, but go ahead and try it anyway. That child learns, I'll feel a little scared at first, but if I go ahead, I'm going to have a good time. And those are the children who don't end up shy. So it's a malleable mix of both.